And I think you've just experienced the difference between coming to church and coming to worship. There's nothing quite like when his people gather, and it goes beyond the songs that we sing. I mean, the talent of the musicians that we've had we've been blessed. But when it goes beyond that, and God's Spirit and moves, and you just feel that there's something different about this. There's something different than just hearing a song on the radio or whatever it may be, and you get to express from your heart who God is. And it's the difference between coming to church and coming to worship. And I think it's what we need each and every Sunday. It's why this is so important. It's because it's not just coming and checking something off the box, but it's coming and meeting with God, and part of that is worship. And so I hope that you have experienced that this morning and will continue to experience that as we move through the morning. Well, this probably doesn't come as a surprise to you, but if you would come over for dinner, and we would invite you over for dinner, and we say, hey, we're going to cook. I'm not the one going to be doing the cooking. When it comes to household chores, cooking is not on my list of things to do. If you tell me, hey, I need you to cook something, you're getting like a Jack's frozen pizza. That's like maybe something in the air fryer that we can put in, but Aaron does the majority of the cooking. Now, to my credit, if you would give me a recipe, I probably could follow the recipe. Now, it's going to take me a lot longer. I'm probably going to have a lot of questions throughout the course of the thing, but I'm probably going to be able to do that. But if you just say, hey, make something off the top of your head and tell me what to do, I'm going to be lost. I'm going to be like, preheat the oven to 350, stick the frozen pizza in, then go. It kind of give you, and even then, sometimes I'm not sure what happens, because a couple weeks ago, we were doing the marriage ministry here at church, and Aaron was gone, and so I was left in charge of cooking like the meal for that day, which was like frozen fettuccine. It had been purchased already, and so I read the directions. I put it in the oven. And like after 55 minutes, I could still reach in and like grab it with my hand. I'm like, something is not right here. Somehow I even messed that up. It turned out our oven was broken here at the church, and we've gotten a new one. But anyway, it's kind of you see my proficiency, that it's not good. And I think for some of you would be that way. If we asked you, hey, can you just make something? You're like, I don't know what to make. But if we would give you a list of step-by-step instructions, and when I say give me a recipe, don't just give me the ingredients. You have to tell me exactly what to do step by step. I probably can do it then. And you're probably along that lines as well. And as we're continuing our series on Genesis this morning, we're coming to a portion of Scripture that really serves as a recipe. It serves as that thing of, here are the ingredients, here's the step-by-step instructions for how you need to do things. And so if you want a spot to follow along and take notes, there's a spot in your bulletin to do just that. Or if you prefer the electronic version, you can open up the YouVersion Bible app under the events section, look for the Rock Church, and there you'll find all the notes and the scripture that we're going to be looking at, as well as some devotional plans that you can choose from to help you go deeper this week. But before we're going further, let's stop and ask God to speak to us. Heavenly Father, this morning we thank you for who you are, and Father, for the fact that you are here. Father, we've already been made aware of that. And so we thank you that you have started to move already. And now as we open up your word, Father, we ask that you continue to move. Father, continue to reveal yourself to us. Father, continue to reveal your heart that we may discover who you are. Father, who you want us to be, and may we be transformed by that. And so, God, continue to make us aware of who you are. And Father, may you do something that only you can do this morning. And we ask all this in your name. Amen. Genesis 18 is where we're going to be at this morning, and we're going to pick up right where we left off last week. If you kind of remember last week where we left off, Abraham and Sarah have had 3 visitors. If you kind of remember, as we looked at that, who are the 3 visitors? The theophany. One of them is God. The other 2 are angels. And they have come to tell Abraham and Sarah that in a year's time, you will have a son. And Isaac is that son. So we're getting close to the promise, the fulfillment of the heir that they have been looking for. And then with verse 16, there sort of takes a little bit of a detour. It goes a little bit away from Abraham and Sarah to another story. And with verse 16 and the rest of chapter 18, what we're going to discover is a recipe for intercessory prayer. that if we want to do it, if this is something that we want to do in our life, what are the things that we need to be part of? What are the step-by-step instructions? Like, okay, do this first, then do this, and then do this. And what you see in Genesis chapter 18, starting with verse 16, is that recipe. It's that one that even if you've never done this before, by the end of the morning, you will have a step-by-step instruction for how you are to do this, which is the goal of every recipe, right? Is you get to the end and it turns out like you want it to be. And all of it starts with the very first ingredient. And the very first ingredient to intercessory prayer is awareness. It is the ingredient of awareness. And we see that beginning with verse 16 of Genesis chapter 18. This is what we read. It says, when the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom. And Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised. And there's an interesting kind of conversation that goes on here, because it almost looks like on the outset that the Lord is talking to himself and trying to figure out what he's going to do. He's like, I got all these options. I'm not sure what would be the best option. And so he's kind of like vocalizing them out loud to get some input. He's not sure what the best thing to do is. And so he's kind of mulling it over in his head what his options may be. That is not what is happening here, okay? God is not like, well, should I let him know? Should I not let him know? I'm not sure. He's not weighing the pros and cons. What he's doing here, because if you kind of know remember the kind of the context of this, that Abraham is walking with them. And so as God is saying this out loud, Abraham is hearing this conversation. Abraham is hearing what is being said. And so what God is letting Abraham know is, Abraham, I want you to know what I'm thinking in all of this. It's sort of a glance behind the curtain as to God's thought process, as to why he's saying what he's saying and why he's about to do what he's about to do. And we can look at this and go, yeah, but it doesn't make any indication of what God is about to do, because we jump to the rest of the story and we're like, well, where is that in what he's going to do there? There's no kind of assessment of what Abraham is or what God is going to do through Abraham. And you would be correct in that. But here's what we can miss. The awareness is not what is going on around Abraham. God is not coming to Abraham and saying, Abraham, I need you to let you know the stuff that's happening on around you. We're going to get to that in just a moment. And so God's not talking all this and going, well, I need to let Abraham know. I need to fill in Abraham on the details. But rather what in this section is, it was also an awareness of Abraham. There's a role I want you to play in all of this. There's a role that you need to understand that you have in all of this, and about what is unfold. Where do we see that? Well, look at the last part of verse 18. It says, all nations on earth will be blessed through him. Well, who's the him? He's talking about Abraham there. And we can read this as, well, yeah, it's that whole thing with Isaac. It's that whole idea of down the road, the Messiah is going to come. All of these things are going to happen. And so this is something that is yet to happen. It's later on. But last time I checked, if God says all nations, he's not just talking about certain ones. He's just not talking about, well, the ones that are going to come later on, when Jesus comes and all that, then this promise will come true. No, what he's talking about is he's talking about all nations, not just the one he likes and the ones that are good. But it means that he's talking about all of them, which would include Sodom. So Sodom is a nation that is supposed to be blessed through Abraham. And again, we jump to the end of the story, and we know what chapter 19 holds maybe. And if you don't, come back next week and we're going to kind of look at that, because we get to the end of that and we're like, well, how well did that work out for them? If that's blessing by Abraham, no thanks, don't want to be part of that. I don't like that portion of it. And so if that's what it means to be blessed, then, that didn't work out well for them, and we're going to pass on that. And here's what we need to realize. Abraham's awareness of how he is supposed to live is not contingent upon the results of it. And so whether or not Abraham, all these nations will be blessed because of Abraham, was necessarily because of the response of the nations. That wasn't the only thing that Abraham had to worry about. He had to be concerned with, and not the only thing that he shouldn't have been worried about that. The concern was, how did he live in all of this? It was around the role that he was to play. The awareness just wasn't for what was going on in Sodom and what was happening there. It was for how Abraham was supposed to live. And so God is having this conversation, and he's hoping that Abraham is listening to this, because he wants Abraham to know, Abraham, you have a role in all of this. There's a role that I want you to play. It's the same role for us. It's what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. If you want to boil it down to one word, the word is influence. God looks at Abraham and says, Abraham, you are to be a blessing on all nations. And what he's telling them is, Abraham, you're supposed to have an influence on the nations around you. Abraham, it's your opportunity to have an influence on what's happening. And so you need to be aware that that's the role that I'm calling you to play. For us, it's the same way. We're not necessarily called to bless all nations, but we're called to be salt, and we're called to be light. We're called to make an influence in the world around us. And so intercessory prayer starts with that awareness. It starts with that awareness of, this is the role that I'm supposed to play. I am supposed to be aware, not just of what is going on in the world, but of what my role in the world is supposed to be. And that is one of influence. There's no way we can look at that and go, well, that's not supposed to be who I am. It's why the recipe for intercessory prayer begins with awareness. Because if we do not have that, this will never even cross our minds. It's why if you're not hungry, you don't think about making food. But no, the stomach starts to growl, and what does that growl do? It makes us aware of this fact of, well, I'm hungry and I should eat, and so I need to make something. And this awareness for us is the idea of being an influence. And then once you have that awareness, you can then add the second ingredient to it, which is invitation. The first ingredient to intercessory prayer is awareness. The second ingredient is invitation. Look there, continuing with verse 20 of chapter 18. It says, then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. And as we read this, there is this question that we have. It's like, okay, why is God telling Abraham this? Like, he's saying this, the outcry against Sodom, all of this. Why is God telling Abraham? What's the purpose behind this? I mean, we don't have any indication of Abraham asking God, saying, hey, what are you doing? We had this good time while we were together. Now we're walking towards Sodom. And why are we going there? Like, what's your plan there? We don't have any indication that Abraham asked that question. It's not just so that Abraham is in the know. It's not that God is looking for Abraham's stamp of approval to satisfy his curiosity in regards to what was about to happen. What's the purpose behind that? I think the reason that God tells Abraham this and has this conversation here is because what he's going to do is he wants to invite Abraham to be part of what he's going to do. He wants to invite Abraham into the story. And at the outset, it seems a little strange because, again, we jump to the end of the story and we're like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, how does Abraham get included in this? Because God is coming and he's saying, the outcry, their sin is so grievous, I'm going to go down. And if you know the end of the story, it does not end well for Sodom and Gomorrah. But if you look at this, there's no indication given as to where this is headed. God doesn't come to Abraham and say, Abraham, this is what I'm about to do. No, he comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, you need to understand something. The sin of Sodom is great. I'm going to go down and I'm going to see if it's as bad as it was, it was reached me. If not, I will know. He's giving him the invitation to act, to be involved. God has made the assessment of who Abraham is. Abraham, you're supposed to be an influence. Abraham, I've created you to be an influence. By the way, Abraham, I've also assessed what's going on in Sodom. And things that are going on in Sodom are not good. There's some things that happen in there that shouldn't be happening. And he presents this to Abraham. And it's now Abraham's choice is, am I going to accept the invitation to get involved or not? God, you told me I'm supposed to be an influence. God, you've told me that I'm supposed to be a blessing to all nations. You also told me about this town down here that is bad. You told me about this town down here that's not good. What am I going to do about it? And I think for a lot of us, we can sort of take that approach when it comes to something like this. We're like, well, he's just telling Abraham so Abraham can sit back and just watch the show unfold. Like, get your popcorn, get a seat, and just don't get too close because, what's about to happen. But, just watch what's about to happen because it's going to be good. But our intercessory prayer is the invitation to join in what God is doing in the world, to be involved in what is happening, to not just sit back and watch, to not just sit back and go, okay, God, if that's what you want to do, that's what you're going to do, and so what do I have to do about it? It's not my business, not my problem. And so what God has done is he's come to Abraham and said, Abraham, I've created you to be an influence in this world. I've created that all the nations are going to be blessed through you. Hey, here's Sodom. What do you want to do about it? And it's that invitation to be involved in what God is doing, to take an active role with God in what's happening, which brings us to the third ingredient to intercessory prayer. You have awareness, you have an invitation, and to all of that, you need to add concern. This is where you respond to the invitation. Because if Abraham says, okay, that's fine, go do what you want to do, God, the story ends there, at least for the remainder of chapter 18. But it doesn't. Abraham sees what's happening, and there's a response that he gets. He gets involved, and look at what happens there. The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of the earth do right? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Notice something interesting that's here, and sometimes we miss it as we read through this because we just read it, and sometimes we don't stop to think about it. Look at where Abraham is at the beginning of verse 22. It says, Abraham remained standing before the Lord. So, the two men who are the angels have left, and we're going to pick up their story in Genesis chapter 19 because they're going to come back into play here in next week. But Abraham remained standing before the Lord. And then look at verse 23. What happens? It says that Abraham approached him. Well, who is that him? It's God. He draws close to him. So he's standing before God. He's in the presence of God. But all of a sudden, Moses makes this assessment and makes this awareness that Abraham, while he's standing before God, he draws closer to God. He moves towards him because of what is happening, because he sees the concern for what is about to happen. And a lot of this time, we read the story, and with some of the backstory that we have, we know that Lot and his family are in Sodom. We looked at that. We know that he's there. And again, Lot's going to appear in chapter 19 as well. And so we read this and we're like, well, Abraham is just concerned for Lot. Abraham is just concerned for Lot and his family, and he wants to make sure that they're spared in all of this. But notice something that Abraham never does. If that's the concern, he never asks for Lot and his family. He never takes the time to say, hey, God, listen, my nephew Lot and his family are there. Will you let them get out and then do what you want with the city? God, will you just spare Lot and his family and then do with the rest what you want to do? I really don't care. I'm just concerned about Lot. Look at the words again for who Abraham is asking for. Abraham is not asking for Lot. Who's he pleading for? He's pleading for the unrighteous. He's pleading, will you destroy them all for the lack of 50 righteous people? When you get to this point, he's asking God for grace and mercy for people who did not deserve it. He's not just let the righteous go, but will you have mercy on the unrighteous? Will you have mercy? Will you have grace on the people that don't deserve, your grace and mercy? Because that's who you are, God. And notice who he appeals to. He doesn't try to justify why they deserve it. He's not like, God, they've done some really good things. God, they're not as bad as you think they are. God, he doesn't get the list. What does he appeal to? He appeals to God's character. He comes to God and says, God, aren't you the just God? God, aren't you the righteous judge? God, aren't you all of these things? And that's what he goes to God on their behalf for. It's not just, oh, well, it's their life. Let them deal with the consequences of the decisions that they've made. Let's be honest, there is a huge difference between being aware of something or someone and caring about something or someone. There are probably a whole bunch of things that we're aware of. We go through life and we're aware of things, but they never rise to the level of concern. They never rise to the level of, well, I need to intercede before God on their behalf. And yet, here's what Abraham does. He sees what's going on. He's made aware of who he is. He's made aware of the situation in Sodom. He sees the invitation for God to be involved, and then something strikes Abraham, and he comes before Abraham, and he approaches God on their behalf. And he comes to them and says, God, will you spare him? God, will you come, and for the sake of 50, will you destroy the wicked or the righteous with the wicked? Will you do all of that? There's probably a whole bunch of things that we're aware of, but they don't even come close to tipping the scale to where we're concerned about them. And so for a lot of people, this is where the recipe for intercessory prayer breaks down. It's not because we're not aware of who we're supposed to be. It's not even because we're unaware of the invitation that we have to be involved. It's because we're really not concerned about what's going on out there. We're like, yep. It's their choice. It's their mess. Let them live with it. They made the decisions. Let them go. But not Abraham. And it does not stop with the concern part, because the concern part is only helpful if followed up by the last piece of the recipe, and that is courage. So to the awareness, you add invitation. To the invitation, you add concern. And to the concern, you add courage. Back to the story, starting with verse 27. Then Abraham spoke up. Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5 people? If I find 45 people there, he said, I will not destroy it. Once again, he spoke to him, what if only 40 are found there? He said, and this is God, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he, being Abraham, said, may the Lord not be angry with me, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there? He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there? He said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left. And Abraham returned home. Notice how Abraham starts this section. There's an interesting thing that Abraham does here. Even though we have the courage, and I mean, if you think about this, you think about what's happening here, we're like, that is pretty courageous. But notice where Abraham starts all of this section with. It starts with awareness of who he is compared to God. You see it there reflected. He says, look at this. Abraham says, though I am nothing but dust and ashes. Abraham comes before God, and he's not coming to God as an equal. He's not coming to God and saying, God, look at all that I've done. You owe me. God, you and me, we're on the same level. We're on the same plane. And so, God, I'm coming to you as an equal. I'm coming to you as someone that deserves something from you. Even when we come to God with confidence and courage, there should be an acknowledgement of the vast difference between who we are and who God is. And that's what Abraham does. He comes and he realizes this is like, I am like out of my element here. He realizes that God does not owe me anything. David writes in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 18, then King David went in and sat before the Lord and said, who am I, sovereign Lord? And what is my family that you have brought me this far? Abraham comes before God and says, God, I'm nothing compared to you. I'm dust. I'm ashes. God, I'm not coming to you with a sense of entitlement. I'm not coming to you because you owe me anything. I'm not coming to you because there's anything that I have confidence in because of who I am. And yet, despite all of that, Abraham and you and I can approach the throne of grace. and we have the freedom to speak to God. And there's this beautiful balance between these two things that we see played out in this section. And we should see it play out in our lives as well. And as Abraham comes to God, he comes to God with a pretty big ask. He comes to God and says, God, if there are 50 people, 50 righteous people in the city, will you spare it? And God says, sure, I'll spare it. And if we were in Abraham's shoes, what do? We stop right there. We're like, all right, got what I asked for, no big deal. Like I prayed, God gave me what I asked for, I'm good. And as Abraham comes to God, he comes up with 6 hypothetical questions. He gets the number of righteous people from 50 all the way down to 10. And we read this, and each time God agrees. Each time that Abraham comes with his new number, God says, okay, I'll do that. And is it ironic that the person, and oftentimes the prayers of people who don't think they have any right to approach God and see the difference between who they are and who God is, are often the prayers that God answers? It's not the prayers of the people that come to him that say, God, you owe me this, or God, I deserve this, or God, you need to do this. But it's those that come with an awareness of their own frailty, that they are the ones whose prayer of intercessions are often accepted by God. But we, in this situation, we would have stopped after 50. But not Abraham. I mean, Abraham starts by going down by 5. He's like, okay, God, I asked for 50. What about 45? And okay, God, you said good to 45. What about 40? Like, how would 40 go? And then it starts to jump by 10. It's an interesting conversation that takes place. And we're like, I don't know if I would have been as bold to ask like what Abraham is doing, because there's this negotiation that's happening, it looks like, on the outset. We're going to get to that here in just a minute. Like, how many of us, like, when we've had kids that have come to us and like, hey, can I stay up to like 11? And we're like, okay, there's a game on or whatever it may be. And they're like, well, how about 11:15? And then what do we say? Don't push your luck. Like, that's how the approach that we have. We're like, we just need to know when to stop. But this is, Abraham comes to God and he's like, God, and again, he's not asking for just a little bit of grace. He's asking for a whole bunch of grace. Because this is an entire city that we're talking about here. And God says, ask me for that. That's what I want you to do. It's what God talks about in Psalms chapter 2, verse 8. It says, ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possessions. And this is something that God says, come to me with these big asks. Come to me with the things that you're like, oh, I don't know if I can come to God with that. And God says, come to me with that. And I don't think that Abraham is seeing how much he can get out of God. Some will look at this and say, well, Abraham is changing God's mind again and again. That God had set his mind on destroying it. And Abraham came to God and said, hey, God, have you thought about if there's 50 righteous people? And God's like, shoot, I never thought about that. Oh, Abraham, I'm so glad you brought that to my attention. Because if you hadn't asked for that, I don't know if I would have thought about that. And man, Abraham, I'm so glad I brought this to you. Abraham is not changing God's mind again and again. The goal of prayer is not to change God's mind. The goal of prayer is not to get what we want. It's not what is happening here. Prayer is most effective when we're concerned with discovering what the Lord is up to in a specific situation. Because it's interesting. Why did Abraham stop? Think about this. Put yourself in Abraham's shoes. In our minds, you've negotiated God all the way from 50 people down to 10. And some would say, well, he's counting Lot and then his daughters and maybe some of their family. And so in his mind, 10 is like the magic number. But if you're Abraham and you've had all of this, why not try to get it all the way down to 1? Like, why not? Lot's in the town, so why not try to get it all the way down to like, hey, Lot's there, so God, can we just not, I know I've been jumping by 10, but can we just go by 9 this time? Why not try to get it all the way down to 1 or 2? Things are going your way. I mean, it's like the auctioneer. It keeps going. And, he's going in the reverse. And you say, stop. No, that's low enough. Think about it. You never do that. You never got, the car dealer said, hey, I've got a better offer for you. And you're like, nope, I like this number. I don't want to hear what lower number you can go. No, tell me, how low can we go? We want that. Not Abraham, he stops. Why stop? Because he had an understanding of who God was. You see, it wasn't about the number for Abraham. It was about who God is. And in the answers that he had to prayer, from taking the number from 50 down to 10, God had revealed himself to Abraham and said, Abraham, this is who I am. Abraham, you need to understand, I'm not just going to do things because I want to. Abraham, you need to understand I am just and I am righteous and I am all these things that you're asking for. And so he had discovered who God was in a deeper way, and he had gotten his answer regardless of what the outcome was going to be. But it would not have come without the courage to ask. So what does that mean for all of us? Well, I think it's time for us to see how well we're doing at following the recipe. It's time for us to take a look and go, okay, am I following the step-by-step instructions to what's there? And it all starts with awareness. There's an awareness of that we are to be an influence. And we get to the who and the what and the when and the where. And I'm reminded of what Paul writes about in Acts chapter 17, verse 26 to 28, when he says this, from one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their land. God did this so they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. You ever talk to someone, they're like, man, I don't know why I was born in this day and age. I would have been much better off in like the colonial periods. Some of you are like, I am so glad I was born with indoor plumbing. Like I couldn't survive in those. And here in chapter 17 of Acts, God says, God appointed the times in history for us to live. He knew who he wanted and where he wanted them. And so it is no accident that you are alive right now in 2024. It is no accident that you are where you are at, whether Portland or Bryant or Bern or wherever that may be, wherever you call home. It is no accident that you have the job that you do. Why is all of that? It is so people may seek him and perhaps reach out to him and find him. And so God has placed people of influence in places that he knows there needs to be. And so for you and I, it begins with living with that awareness. Living with that awareness of this is who I am supposed to be. I am supposed to be an influence on wherever God has put me. There's a reason I wasn't born in the 60s. There was a reason I wasn't alive in the roaring 20s. There's a reason I wasn't alive when, during Abraham's time. There's a reason, because God didn't need me there. He needs me now to be the influence. And it starts with the awareness of that. It also starts with the awareness of the world around us. Second thing, are we going to accept his invitation to be part of what God is doing in this world? And when we say world, not just what we see on the news, and not just what is over there, but what's here and what's local. Are we going to accept God's invitation to be a part of that? Or are we just going to sit back and hope that it magically happens? God will come and we'll gather on a Sunday morning and we'll worship, but God, we just found it magically happens that out there, it just sort of takes place. Are we going to accept his invitation because of the awareness that we have, that we are called to be an influence? Third, are you concerned? Who do you know that doesn't know who Jesus is? And are you concerned about it? Are you concerned that they don't know Jesus? And here's what we do. Well, Portland's not as bad like Sodom. Like, come on, we're not that bad. And true, we're not that bad. We're not, God, I don't think God is threatening to destroy us with fire and brimstone anytime soon. And we're going to talk about what that is, because I think there are some similarities, not just between Portland and Sodom, but I think our culture now. And I think there's some lessons that we can learn from that. But who do we know that doesn't know God? Does it concern you? Are you aware of the spiritual needs of this city, of your workplace, of your neighborhood? Does it concern you? Or you're like, not my problem, not my life. And I'm just going to go my 9 to 5, and it's just not going to, I'm not even going to think about it. And then finally, do you have the courage to ask God for big things? To intercede for him to move in our city and in the lives of the people who do not know him? Because here's the thing, it's easy to intercede for the people that already know him. And we should. We should intercede when needs come up of the people that already know him. And it's one of the things why the Connect cards, we encourage you, if you have a prayer request and you want us to intercede, we encourage you to fill those out. And whether it's just the staff or whether it goes out on the prayer chain, we encourage you to fill that out so other people can be praying. But let's be honest, it's real easy to pray for other people that know him already. Because we're alike. We think good. They're good people. It's much different to intercede for people that don't know him. If we're not interceding for those who do not know him, the chances of us taking any steps to help them discover who he is probably not there either. Because if we're not going before God for them, if we're not stepping close to God and saying, God, I'm already before you, but on their behalf, I'm going to approach you, and I'm going to ask for your grace. I'm going to ask for your mercy upon them, because right now they don't know you. Right now they're lost. And if we're not doing that, chances are we're not taking any action to help them know you, discover him. Because if we're not praying for them, we're not looking for the opportunities. And it's more than just God, help me be an influence. That's a good prayer to pray. And that's good. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't pray those prayers of the generic prayers. But if we don't have specific people that we're interceding for, God, this is this person. It's not just a name, it's a face that I know. It's a relationship that I have. And I know that they don't know you, and I'm aware that you have called me to be an influence. And so, God, I'm accepting that invitation because I care about them. And so, God, I'm coming before you for courage that I ask you to spare them. God, I ask you, use me in a way to reach them. That is a bold prayer. That is a big ask. Because it's not, God, do something in their life through someone else. It's, God, do something in their life because of me. Do something in their life because of who I am and because of the relationship that I have with them. And God, I'm asking you to use me in an incredible way. And when we begin to pray like that, what we talked about earlier, and I love that song that we sang, and I know for some of you it was a newer song, and we're going to sing it here, some of it at the end, but there's this idea that when we pray, God moves. And we could say, well, wait a minute, we get to chapter 19 and we know what happens, and spoiler alert, God ends up destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're like, but don't look at just the end of the story and go, well, why did we have chapter 18? It's for Abraham, it's for you and I. Because God is coming and saying, listen, there's a lost world out there. And Abraham, I put you in it to be an influence. What are you going to do about it? And whether or not they accept, that's not on you, Abraham. Abraham, don't worry about it. Abraham says, God comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, this is what I want you to be aware of. I'm inviting you. Abraham has this concern and this courage, and then he gets involved. That's the recipe for intercessory prayer for the lost. And it's the same recipe God gives to each and every one of us this morning and says, are you going to follow it? And here's the thing. For some of you, it's going to take a while. You're going to be like, man, I'm following a recipe and I got to go step by step, and it's going to be a slow process. I'm not going to have it committed to my memory, and that's okay. It takes you a little bit to get through it, and you're like, okay, I'm not even sure how to pray. That's the start of it. Coming to God and saying, God, I don't even know how to pray. God, will you help me understand what it is? But the more and more you do it, the more and more it will just become routine. And so God brings someone into your mind, and you'll immediately know how to pray for them. And you'll go throughout your day, and you'll pray for them with the interactions that you have. And sometimes you don't know the influence that you're going to have on somebody. You don't know the influence that you're going to have, but we've been called to be an influence. And so this morning, how's your awareness? Not just of how the world is, because we can be aware of how the world is. Oh, man, the world's a bad place. There's a lot of bad things happening in the world, and we can go on and on and on. Are we aware of who we're supposed to be? We're to be salt and light. We're to be the influence. Are we going to accept God's invitation to be involved in what he wants to do in this world? Are we concerned about the spiritually lost. The people that right now, either if Jesus would come back or they take their last breath, would spend an eternity apart from him. Are we concerned about that? Does it bother us? And does it drive us to have a courage to come before God and say, God, I got this big ask. God, I know the direction that they're headed, and God, help me to be involved in their life. Who's that one person that you need to be praying for this morning? Heavenly Father, this morning we thank you for who you are. God, I pray for those moments that I've lived without the awareness of who I am. And God, I know all of the pictures. I know salt, and I know light, and I know ambassador, and I know everything. But God, I've lived without the awareness that I'm to be that influence. Father, whether it's for me, whether it's down at the Ball Diamonds, whether it's in my neighborhood, God, forgive me for the times that I've not lived with that awareness. God, forgive me for the times that I've not accepted that invitation to be involved, not just what you're doing in the world, but Father, what you're doing in my world and in my sphere and in my circle. God, forgive me for the times that I've not been concerned. That, God, I've not had the big asks, and I've not stepped towards you on the behalf of someone that I know is lost. And God, I know it's so easy to say, well, God, Abraham's prayer, what did it change? It didn't change anything. He did all this, and Sodom still perished. And God, that is the way the story went. But God, we don't know how our story's going to unfold. We don't know the story, how that's going to unfold of the life of our coworker, of our friend, of our neighbor. And God, what if the unfolding of the story is us being able to celebrate that they come home? That joy of when they find life, they find hope, that's the end of the story. And God, you're inviting us to be part of that, to be part of the celebration when the lost come home and we are family and we worship together. And so God, may we understand our responsibility. God, you're the only one that can transform lives. We can't save anybody. You've not asked us to save anybody. But Father, you've asked us to be an influence. You've asked us to intercede for family and for friends, to step towards you on their behalf. And so God, for the names, for the faces, for the people that are running through our minds right now, that you're saying you don't have to look far. God, may we start the recipe, and may we see it through to completion, because we know it is you that is helping us. And so, Father, this morning, may we stand in the gap. May we intercede for a lost world that desperately needs to know who you are. And may you use us to be an influence. And we ask all this in your name. Amen.